Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jim Hawk, and this is my colleague, Hwesi Zanu. And in July, representatives from neighborhood organizations throughout Davidson County will be meeting for the second Neighborhood Leadership Forum since the pandemic. During our time together, we're going to be discussing how can the Mayor's Office of Neighborhoods best be organized under the next mayoral administration to support local neighborhoods and neighborhood organizations. And we thought there was no better way to think about the future than to look back at the past. And so today we are here with Mayor Bill Purcell and Davidson County Clerk Brenda Wynn. Bill Purcell was the 5th mayor of the metropolitan government of Nashville and Davidson County, elected first in 1999 and reelected to a second term in 2003. Brenda Wynn served as the first director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhoods, or MOON, which was established by Mayor Purcell shortly after becoming mayor. Mayor Purcell, Brenda Wynn, welcome. Glad you're here.
Thanks, Jim.
Mayor Purcell, can you take us back to the 90s and share with us why you were motivated to run for the office of mayor and what you saw as your priorities at that time?
Well, at the time that I began my campaign for mayor, I was convinced that there were 3 basic priorities for the city of Nashville. And I was further convinced that they had always been the priorities and honestly that they always would be. And I announced that very early from the beginning, that I thought that education was the most important thing that we do, always was and always will be. That public safety was a close second in order of priority, that people needed to be safe and feel safe. And if they weren't and didn't feel safe, that they wouldn't come and they certainly wouldn't stay. But that thirdly, and critical to the future of the city, was the quality of life in this place. And from the start, I described quality of life as being that place where we come from and the place we go back to our neighborhoods, the places that we call home, places where we raise families, the places where we retire, and the places where we grow old. And so the neighborhood notion, the importance of our neighborhoods, was at the core of my campaign for mayor, of my plans for being mayor, and ultimately became, for me, I believe, the critical component of making sure that Nashville was the place that we would all want to call home.
One of your first acts as mayor, I think it was the first act of mayor, was to establish the Mayor's Office of Neighborhoods. Why was it so important to you to establish this office, and what did you hope it would do? What would it accomplish?
Well, having campaigned across this city for as long as I had, and having said, as I just reported, that neighborhoods were central to our past and our future, I knew that we needed to move quickly to make sure that that was an understanding, not just in the larger city, but frankly, within the courthouse, within the city government itself. And so indeed, the first substantive executive order that I issued, the first new addition to the orders of the metropolitan government was to in fact issue executive order number 2, which was the creation of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhoods. Executive order number 1 is always the continuation of all of the existing executive orders, because otherwise they go out of effect with the departure of the previous mayor. So you'll find that all mayors, the first thing they do is make sure that they keep the existing executive orders in place. But this was a new administration and I was a new mayor, and we'd made a new set of commitments. And so to make that very clear, inside and outside of the government, the very first new executive order I issued was to create the Mayor's Office of Neighborhoods within the Office of Mayor.
And was that, I'm sorry, I wasted that's the question, but was that something that you had seen in other governments across the country, or was this something that you personally felt this was important and so you were on your own?
Honestly, at least I did not have a model for what we were about to do. I knew that we had no experience of that within the mayor's offices. I've been in and around the government for much of my adult professional life, and I was very clear that it's not something we had. We had constituent services, we had people that took calls and handled complaints and problems. Every mayor has that. But this required something new and special. And so the hope was that this would become the core and central meeting place for not just the existing neighborhoods that were organized, but also in the organization of the balance of the neighborhoods within the city of Nashville. I came out of East Nashville. I still live in East Nashville. East Nashville had a long history of organized neighborhood associations. Edgefield, Lockland Springs, East End, those were the neighborhoods I lived in, and I knew what those neighborhood organizations can and would do when they were together and supported and encouraged. There were some other neighborhood associations in place, especially in the area around Vanderbilt. But in general, it was clear to me that the future of this effort was going to be dependent on having people within the mayor's office who would be absolutely committed from the first thing in the morning to the last thing at night to supporting the neighborhoods that had organized themselves already, and in many ways, more importantly, organizing the rest of the neighborhoods, encouraging the other neighborhoods to come together in the same way. One more thing was clear to me as well. In order for this to be successful, there had to be a leader at the front of that office who felt those same callings, who felt the same imperative in the work, and someone who was fearless in going into any place, whether it was organized or not, and saying, here's what we need to do, here's how we can help you. Now you need to tell us what we can do to make sure that you're successful in your neighborhood. And it didn't take very many minutes for me to realize that Brenda Wynn was the one person in the city of Nashville who had the qualities that were necessary. Fearlessness is an important beginning, but more importantly, a commitment in her core to making sure that people felt and ultimately acted upon the knowledge that their city cared about them, where they lived, and wanted their neighborhood to be as good a place as it could possibly be.
That is very, very inspirational. And Brenda, I'm going to put you on the spot because here's a brand new, unmodeled agency office in a new administration, and you're called to task to lead that. Could you give us a little bit of insights in what you were thinking when you were offered this opportunity, and then how did the mayor's office of neighborhoods function on a day-to-day basis?
Well, let me honestly say that when Bill offered me the opportunity, the first thing I did was to tell him I need to make a couple of calls. And one of the calls that I made was to my pastor. I told Bill, I try to pray about things. And so I need to pray about this before I give you an answer. And after praying about it and thinking through things, I just decided I would let God lead me as he has always done. And so I agreed to do it. Bill and I sat and we talked about what his vision was, what his expectations would be. He was very, let me say, he deferred to me in so many ways by saying, it can be what you create. And so Bill gave me the flexibility. He gave me a blank canvas to create that Office of Neighborhoods. We spent time, again, looking at best practices around the country. Bill sent me to places where I could learn. Bill helped me by bringing in a support system. I had a great staff, but I also had help from, we had a fellow from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Grant. I'm struggling with Grant's last name now, but we had a fellow from the Annie E. Casey Foundation that helped us as we laid out the plan for what the Office of Neighborhoods would be. We didn't want to tell neighborhoods what we wanted to be. We invited them to come join us as we created this. And so Grant helped us do that. Neighborhoods had input. I was told that government should not be involved in organizing, but I didn't know that I believed that. I still don't to this day, Bill, because I just knew we had an opportunity to go into neighborhoods that had not been organized in the past, and to give them the resources that they would need to be successful. Our goal was to help neighborhoods change, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Because if you're ever going to get to true neighborhood change, it's got to happen from the inside out. And so again, with Bill's leadership, we were able to create a neighborhood training academy, because what we believed was that if neighborhood leaders were going to get to true change, they had to know, they had to have the knowledge they needed to make change happen. I mean, most people didn't know how to get a zoning change. They didn't know codes laws. And so we created a neighborhood training academy that helped them get a 501c3, that helped them understand what it would take to operate in the city of Nashville. We gave them codes and zoning training. Bernard Turner, somebody that we knew, did a grant writing training class for these folks. And so, and I don't remember all the courses that we offered, but it was an opportunity to invest in their knowledge base and to build their knowledge base. The thing that I was most proud of and that Bill endorsed, and I don't know that he necessarily said anything to David Manning, but we invested money. We invested in neighborhoods. I believe that if neighborhoods were ever going to believe that we trusted them to do things, we had to invest in them. And so David Manning gave us money to invest into small scale improvement projects that neighborhood organizations wrote. They wrote the plan for us, they implemented them, and then we followed them through to completion, and then they reported back, providing the right documentation that they needed to prove that they'd spent the money the way they said they were going to. It was for us, and I think for neighborhoods, an example of how you can have civic and government partnerships working together to get things done in community.
Thank you so much for that. Before we leave, I want to just go back real quickly to the 3 priorities that Mayor Purcell had mentioned, and I want to go back to the third one, the quality of life. And as you were explaining that priority was futuristic in its ideas, because what you described is the model that is being used today for age-friendly neighborhoods, because we start at the very beginning and all the way to the end. And that's what the concept of age-friendly neighborhood is about. Sometimes people misinterpret that term to mean that we're talking about doing things only for people in the, let's say, the seniors. But it's across the life spectrum. And this is what I heard you, when you said quality of life for everyone, that's what struck me. It's so very futuristic, because this is what we're doing right now. And you had that idea over 25 years ago.
Well, I do think that Nashville is a city that understands that when we talk about quality of life, it is for everyone. That the core of issues of equity, of fairness, of justice, is the notion that everyone can participate and everyone can hope and expect that they would share in the quality of life of a larger city. And when a neighborhood is organized, that becomes, frankly, possible in a way that it otherwise would not be. Whether you're talking about the built environment and sidewalks and streets being both accessible and also safe, or you're talking about the things that enhance the built environment, from parks to libraries, every manner of green space. It leads you to bike lanes, but it also leads you to remembering that neighborhoods are where people live. So it's a home. It's making sure you have a home that you can afford, a home that you can stay in. It's making sure that there's employment in the community that allows you to sustain the rest of your quality of life as well. Staying focused on the neighborhoods themselves is what keeps the city focused on what makes people's lives and frankly their dreams successful. There are times and places and people who focus strictly on projects. Some focus strictly on challenges. Some turn their attention to other circumstances or events. All of those are part of being mayor and part of being a city. But what sustains us over the long haul are the neighborhoods where people can find themselves and their futures with an assurance that the city cares about that. And the Office of Neighborhoods is the one absolutely visible, overarching framework that provides that assurance for everyone all the time.
Thank you so much. But one of the things that people still talk about, and now I'm hoping that you'll talk about it. Christine Taylor was the first to tell me how, and she still remembers all of those meetings that you had where you brought public officials together. Can you tell me about, can one of you two or both of you all share some conversation about what that was about and why that was so important?
Well, I'll start and Brenda can fill in, or Brenda, do you want to begin?
No, I want you to start because I think, our first one was in what was it, Phil Ponder's district?
It was way out in Hermitage. We started Mayor's Nights Out. I had promised that the mayor and the city government was going to be out in the neighborhoods, that we were going to come to them. And so we came together as a staff and we said, where shall we start? And very frankly, I thought, well, let's start in a neighborhood where everything is happy and everything is good. Let's start in a place, it's the first one. So let's start in some place where we don't really have any great expectations that there'll be a great dissatisfaction. We need to practice. We need to see how it works. So we chose Hermitage, and we chose a school gymnasium in Hermitage, and we chose a format which we stayed with throughout the time I was mayor. And the format was simply the mayor is here and the whole city government is here. Every single department head of a relevant department is going to be here. So the chief of police is here, and the fire chief is here, and representatives of the schools are here. And Public Works is here, and literally every
Roads and planning, everybody was there.
all there. And I'm not here to make a speech or for anyone to make a speech. I'm here because we want to hear what your problem is, or what your need is, or what your dream is. And it's going to take a while because I'm going to talk to every single person who comes personally, one-on-one. If while you're waiting for me, you would like to talk to a department head and see if you can work through whatever the issue is before you talk to me, fine, there'll be plenty of time because it's going to take a while. So the department heads are here and they're at their own tables. And so the format was set when we went in. What we didn't know is who would be there. And there was no expectation, it had never been done before. When we arrived at that gymnasium in the neighborhood that I thought was satisfied and happy in every way, it was packed to the roof, to the rafters. That I walked into that room and people were just jammed in there. And I got up, Brenda was there, Brenda and me, and all the rest of the department heads, but it was our thing. And I said, well, here you are, and here I am, and we're going to start. And for the life of me, I can't tell you how many hours we were there that night, but it was pretty much all night. But we talked and met with everyone, and we said one more thing, which is, we're going to be back out in the neighborhoods next month. If your issue has not been resolved by the department head that you've talked to and that I've turned the problem over to, because that we would also then call over the relevant department head and say, here's the problem here, here's the person, see what you can do. But in a month from now, if your problem's not resolved, I'm going to be back somewhere else in Nashville. And I want you to come and tell me that your problem hasn't been resolved. And we'll talk about it some more and we'll see why it didn't get resolved, why the need hasn't been met. And that had a great effect, frankly. It had a great effect on the government because the department heads knew if we hadn't worked through it in the 30 days ahead, it'd be back next month and the same mayor and the same person and the same problem, and we would all be there together again. And we did that literally every month for the rest of the time.
Every council district got a mayor's night out meeting. We went to every council. Well, Bill went to every council district.
Well, we all did. We were all there. We were all there. And I'll tell you the way I knew it was successful. By the last two meetings, and let me say over time, the numbers were reduced each and every time we convened. And the meetings moved more quickly each and every time we were together, in part because the government knew the drill and in part because the neighbors knew the drill. But mostly because people were beginning to anticipate the need to handle that problem. And they knew It wasn't going to be 6 months. It was going to be next month. Next month, the mayor's going to be out in the community. Next month, the community is going to have a chance to report that their needs aren't being met. By the time we got to the end of those 8 years, my recollection is no more than 2 handfuls of people came. And when they came to say, thank you. They came to say, I want to say goodbye. They came to say, I wanted to see how you're holding up. Hadn't seen you in several years and see if you're still, walking around and taking nourishment. But they were there not because they had an overarching problem that was motivating them to come out of the house at night, but because they felt like their city was doing what it was supposed to do for them. And the satisfaction in that at the end was frankly as much satisfaction as a mayor needs.
Well, we've got one more question for you, and it's one that I'm very interested in because since I'm director of Neighbor to Neighbor, can you talk just a little bit about the relationship that the Mayor's Office of Neighborhoods had to then Neighborhoods Resource Center, which is now Neighbor to Neighbor, and also to the National Neighborhood Alliance, which is no longer around, but it was more of an advocacy group?
Well, we were all partners, and that's how we viewed our work. We worked together to make neighborhoods better. In fact, as Bill was talking about how departments had responded to our Mayor's Night Out meetings, I recall that we created what we called a neighborhood response team. And that neighborhood response team came about because our work with the Neighborhoods Resource Center and the National Neighborhood Alliance told us that there were some communities that just felt they didn't have the capacity to get folks to respond to them the way they needed to. So we created this neighborhoods response team where we brought together codes and public works and NES and any other department that had an impact on neighborhoods, the sheriff's department. We worked together with the Neighborhoods Resource Center to do weekend cleanings of alleyways. I mean, we had workshops together. Our first conference of neighborhoods we did in cooperation and in partnership with the Neighborhood Resource Center. So we viewed each other as partners. And I just believe we had a great working relationship such that we could work together to make neighborhoods better. And I want to say to Bill that I think he did a fabulous job with neighborhoods, so much so that our neighborhoods around the city have just grown, interest in them have grown by leaps and bounds, and folks want to move into the neighborhoods. I ran into a young man who's running for council in a district, and he said he lived downtown, and I said, I remember Bill Purcell talking about our neighborhood downtown and what we needed to do to help build it. And look at what's happened. So you did a fabulous job, guy.
Well, it was in large measure the team that Brenda assembled and led and inspired. They went out and organized where no one had been able to organize before. And let me be very frank about this. Not everyone is in favor of organized neighborhoods. I tell you this, it is another place. It is a power center. Organized properly, there is power and strength in an organized neighborhood. And so if you are a council member who is not interested in constituent services, or a council member who is not interested in the problems of everyone, an organized neighborhood is a pain, because an organized neighborhood is right there in your face, in the grocery store, right there on the street with you. And the organized neighborhood is saying to you, it's time. We need, you haven't, we want, where are you? Why not? That's what an organized neighborhood does all the time. Now, a good council member who is on top of their game and doing the right stuff, a strong neighborhood is everything they want too. But I will also say in the case of department heads and folks in the government, it was not for everyone's sweetness and joy to have organized neighborhoods, because it's the same way with elected officials. Those organized neighborhoods were on the phone. They were sending the letter. They were reminding the mayor and other people that the problem was promised, the solution was promised, and the problem's still here. They were all about it all the time. And Brenda and her team went out and organized the city.
Well, I want to say that Bill helped us because he had been at Vanderbilt and we were able to recruit students. One of the neighborhoods that we went door to door in twice was Salem Town. And you remember, Bill, how we went into Salem Town and said, this transformation that's happening to your south, which was Germantown, it's moving this way. And you guys might want to be prepared for the transformation that's coming. You might want to consider organizing. And eventually they did. It took us a minute, but eventually they got organized. And look at that neighborhood today.
And in fact, that's perhaps one of the easiest examples for everyone to understand. There are people who will say that Germantown and Salem Town were created by the investment in a baseball stadium. That's not right. There are people who will say that it somehow came out of a disaster like the tornado. That's not the story. I mean, what happened, and the city made investments, tax income and financing in affordable housing. There are many pieces to the story, but at the core of the story of Germantown and Salem Town, it really is the organization that occurred. Some of it prior, Bert L. Campbell and the folks who had organized in Germantown, really to resist the city, to resist the things that the city was trying to do, which is one way that neighborhoods get organized, right, is in defense. And that's a typical way they were organized in Nashville historically, to protect themselves against things that the city either was doing that they didn't want or things the city wasn't doing that they needed. But once Brenda went in with this proactive strategy, suddenly there was a group of neighbors who were saying, actually, we need this. We need more of that. We need your help with something else altogether. The power of that is as visible in the Salem Town and Germantown areas as anywhere in the city. Everywhere it happened, you found neighbors who not only had better neighborhoods, but had a much higher level of satisfaction about us, about the city itself, about government, and ultimately about the future. And that's what you have to have for a city to be sustained over the long term. I know we had it at that time. I think there's every reason to hope and believe that with the support of these same basic principles in the next mayoral term and the next mayoral term and the next mayoral term, that it is, as Brenda is, an irresistible force for good. And that's what I hope and believe is Nashville's future.
Mayor Purcell, Brenda Wynn, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been very insightful, and I am sure that our neighborhood leaders who watch this will find it fascinating. So thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having us.